Welcome back to the Academy Table. I'm Renee DeSilva, CEO of the Academy and your host, and we are happy to have you back with us again. Recently, I had the pleasure of speaking with Mike Serbinis, a tech entrepreneur who is the founder and CEO of League. League, if you're not familiar, is a patient engagement platform that offers a digital front door for providers and payers. As you'll hear, in addition to his success as an entrepreneur, Mike is an incisive thought leader on all things engagement and solving big problems. Our conversation covers a lot of ground, but there are three takeaways that I'd leave you with. First, I appreciate how clearly Mike articulates the key problems in digital health. Patients want their healthcare experience to be as seamless as Peloton or Netflix, frictionless, intuitive platforms versus point solutions. Next, Mike shares thoughts on the value of building mission-oriented teams. He attributes part of his success outside of healthcare to having teams of generalist problem solvers with a failure is not an option mantra. And lastly, I love his sentiment of fear is fuel as an accelerant for change. It certainly applied to Mike during his time competing with Amazon in the eReader space and applies to leaders in healthcare today facing similar external threats. So with that, let's head to the table. Mike Serbinis, welcome to the Academy Table. Really happy to have you here with us today.
Great to be here with you today. Thank you.
I want to start with this concept of healthcare engagement, or really engagement overall. I think as an industry, there is a recognition that healthcare is lagging other industries as to really sophisticated customer engagement. So from your perspective, how do you define best-in-class engagement broadly?
So this is where I've spent the last 25 years building platforms that drive engagement across a broad number of different industries, very different types of services, but all mass consumer services that have reached hundreds of millions of users in every country, in every language. And this insight that I had was that healthcare was actually more stuck in a systems of record transaction model during episodes of care versus a more of a systems of engagement model that is continuous and 365 days a year and follows an individual's entire life cycle that's completely personalized to them. And this bet that the future of healthcare was actually not like my grandparents' cable TV. It was more like Netflix, right? More like the services that we all use, and my kids use all the time, that are personalized, digital, always on, and follow you certainly before an episode of care and then long after. That model of continuous engagement and the shift from healthcare to, more broadly speaking, health is the mindset shift that I think the industry really needs to make.
I love that. I love that. Your insight around system of record, which we've as an industry spent multi-millions of dollars in creating, that is very different than a system of engagement that meets people where they are on that customer or on that journey. So just staying on that for a second, you talk about Netflix, and there are other examples there that have very curated paths based upon who's in front of them. When you think about this sort of consumer-centric digital front door, how do you think about maybe the key building blocks of architecting a strategy around that?
So what you want in very simple terms is you want to connect each person that walks through the door with the right next best action, activity, program, provider, benefit that's right for them at that point in time. And you want to be able to do that again across a broad spectrum of demographics, of region or geography or accessibility, or where they are even on their healthcare, on the healthcare continuum, from healthy to acutely ill or chronically ill. And that type of connection, if you can achieve it, is what can drive better service, better outcomes, better economics. And so building blocks, you need a very wide mouth to the funnel, so to speak. Give people many reasons to show up and walk through that front door, not just a point solution or not just some information that they'll come for once and not again, or they'll come for once a year. That's not going to get you too far. You need this idea of a one-stop shop, bringing people to 48 or 62 or some other obscure number that is more than three different places to engage, it just doesn't work. Think of the number of whether it's apps that you engage with on your phone or the number of digital content services you engage with. Like, we just all can't handle that much complexity. So you need to bring it together. When they walk through that front door, it's straightforward where they can go next. And you need to leverage data. And I think in healthcare, we are very caught up, and you mentioned this, in systems of record and just getting some data in some place, on EMR usually, but that's kind of not enough. You need a broader spectrum of data that you can then use to infer, make recommendations, make nudges, deliver that universal health journey that is more personalized for every user, so they keep coming back throughout the year for many reasons, and it just gets better and better over time. And that's what we want to get to in healthcare.
Yeah. And so let's stay on that for a second. This episodes of care model of engagement that is more than the sort of two, maybe rough interactions a year. Do you think patients want to engage with their health more? There's also maybe a counterpoint, which would be, in some ways, you want to try to design things in such a way where you can think about your less decision-making, more sort of nudges, as you talked about. But I'd love your thoughts on, do you fundamentally think that patients have an interest in engaging with their health more?
We are creatures of habit. We want to engage with services, content, products, brands that give us that little dose of benefit. And when it comes to healthcare, there's so much pent-up frustration in services, products, providers that honestly give us some benefit, but also give us a lot of cognitive dissonance about what doesn't work, what's not working. And so you see evidence in the market that if I were a healthcare CEO, I would say these are leading indicators, right? That Peloton is on the homepage of many people's mobile devices. And even people like me, while I'm interested in all things sports and fitness, personally, I never would have thought that I'd be going to a service like that on a regular basis, especially for activities that I think of as just more basic, like going for a walk or going for a run. So there's evidence, and don't look to necessarily the incumbents and where the market was. Look to where the market is going, and services like Apple and what Peloton is trying to do, new consumer direct services like what Hims is doing. Consumers want to engage, and they're going to spend their time with the services that give them value in that engagement.
Yeah, I think that's right. I also think that I think consumers and patients want to engage. We want that experience to be frictionless. We want it to be connected. We hear a lot about, sometimes with this boom in sort of digital technology, the risk of that is that it can create greater fragmentation of care if not appropriately designed. So that probably brings us to League. Tell us a bit more about the platform that you built.
Well, I think there's a rapid acceleration happening in the market today in healthcare, and the need for a consumer-centric digital transformation in healthcare is here. Part of that was driven and has been going on for years. There's a secular trend and consumers wanting things more frictionless, more easy to access, always on. We've seen many point solutions, which when I first came into healthcare is what I saw is, wow, there is a sea of point solutions here that are nipping at pieces or parts of the elephant. And certainly COVID has helped. COVID has accelerated this trend. And beyond that, there are many new entrants where the bulk of capital has gone in the last 24 months, even in the last 6 months, that are trying to change this. And organizations have been working on this problem of consumerization and digitization for some times. But they've got legacy systems, they have challenges of budgets, finding talent, and all of a sudden you've got a hurry up offense. And no one's invented a time machine yet, so you can't go back in time to start earlier. And everyone's trying to assemble these point solutions and do either a custom build or outsource it, because kicking the can down the road is no longer an option. So our view is this is happening. It's happening now. The consumer wants a better experience, more personalized, digital, always on. And this pattern, we've already established that exists in other industries, and it is here. And what we know from other industries, point solutions eventually give way to platforms because the economics are better, the experience for the end user is typically better. And in healthcare, it's even more needed because the surface area is just massive. So like Amazon is, or AWS is to millions of developers, and Shopify is to millions of merchants, League's platform as a service model to payers, providers, and healthcare organizations is really there to help them build and rapidly transform their end customer, patient, member experience to really deliver that modern digital offering in healthcare. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just build on a platform like League and pay for what you use on a consumption basis, and you can get there in a matter of months instead of years, and you can get to that impact that we all are looking for in healthcare.
Yeah, what's interesting to me, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out across the next couple of years, is what makes healthcare hard, right? Part of it is that I don't think any of us, if we took a blank sheet, would redesign healthcare the way that it stands today. But you've got this phenomenon of that oftentimes the consumer of the experience is not often the payer of that interaction, right? So wherein if you take models that are more direct to consumer, it can be cleaner in terms of how the payment of that and the service delivery or the value is connected. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. So in a world where, and maybe it's just how we think about the right people to have these conversations with, and in your recent experience, has it been more of a payer conversation in your mind that's really focused on this, just given how the business model works in healthcare?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there. I think you're absolutely right that the complexity in healthcare is in part led to just making this transformation a lot more challenging, and certainly from many organizations' perspectives, a lot more costly, and so the hurdle looks incredibly high. But payers, whether those are organizations like Humana, who's one of our newest partners, are absolutely focused on this digital transformation because they see that whether it's their customer, the end member or consumer, or in fact the employer, they're making decisions, purchasing decisions based on the direction and the digital transformation of the offering that Humana and other payers are providing. So in their case, they're using our digital infrastructure, our platform, to deliver a new front door to healthcare for their group and specialty members. And we will architect, configure, implement the platform with their systems and their content. And the ultimate goal is to drive that superior experience, better outcomes, better economics, and this shift really again from systems of record and transactions to systems of continuous engagement. And it's happening. And I see it happening across the payer landscape. And what's fascinating, I got asked this question the other day from a CFO of a well-known payer who said, we still use fax machines over here. Not every one of your customers, your prospects is going to have all kinds of amazing investment over the last 5 to 10 years or infrastructure that you can walk in and connect to. Some of us are still using fax machines. And I found that really interesting because what I've seen is everyone has a very complex environment. The surface area to deliver the kind of experience we're talking about is large. No one can do it all. Everyone needs to think with a partner or partnership mindset, which for a lot of these organizations is quite different. That's quite a shift.
Yeah, I think it's also terrifying that so much of healthcare is still fax machine and paper based. But we'll leave that for a later conversation. Your background is interesting. I want to maybe switch a bit to talk about you and some of the things that you've done leading up to your current area of focus. So you are a serial entrepreneur. You founded a cloud-based document storage company. You then launched Kobo, which was an e-reader that competed with Amazon. I wonder, I guess, two questions here. On the surface, these companies are in completely different industries. How do you think about, where do you draw inspiration? And then how do you just generally think about identifying opportunities?
Yeah, so I grew up inspired by the space race and NASA. I wanted to solve hard problems, and ultimately I wanted to make things. And I had a really early experience where I know a lot of us are watching the Olympics right now. I won the Nerd Olympics, the International Science and Engineering Fair, sponsored by the DoD. And I saw it was possible to make something and solve really hard problems and deliver something that a lot of people could use. And so when I was in college and I got a call from the now super famous Elon Musk and his brother Kimbal that were at college with me to move down to Silicon Valley and to build something that we didn't even have a name for back then. We would think of it as a search engine today. I was like, yeah, that is what I want to do. So across search, and then talked about cloud storage, ebooks, email, like bringing email from once upon a time, believe it or not, there was like only a few million people using email to that first billion consumers using email was actually, while sounds pretty simple, was actually a really, really hard problem. And so I've gravitated towards solving these kind of large scale consumer problems. They may sound pretty simple, but they're always incredibly complex to execute on. And I've always kind of started with this. The inspiration is like, this is possible. We can imagine the future we want and that we believe in that should happen, assemble a team, a mission-driven team whose sole purpose in life is to go figure it out. And they're rarely experts, but they're mission-driven. And ultimately, there's nothing more sweet than going through one of those journeys and impacting the lives of millions or hundreds of millions of people, including those that helped you make the dream become reality. So for me, that's been the inspiration, and I've had the pleasure and the opportunity, good fortune of doing it across industries. And actually, I think that's put me in a really unique position coming into healthcare. And I don't think I can say I'm new to it anymore. It's been over 6 years, but mass consumer engagement, mass consumer experiences, things that sound simple, but ultimately are really complex under the hood that are enabled by platforms. It's what I've learned how to do. And my team and I have built a practice of being excellent at that over the last 20 years.
Yeah, it's heartening. And your email example is heartening. I remember when I was in college, I graduated in 97. I didn't have email was not really a thing. So there is something to it. Feels slow and grinding and taxing in the moment. But when you look at maybe over a 10, 20-year aperture, the speed at which we can transform does give us a little bit of optimism in terms of maybe driving that next wave in healthcare in particular. So I think your sentiment is a good one. Can we stay on this thread for a moment on solving big problems, assembling teams that are mission driven? And oftentimes they may not be experts, but they are problem solvers and mission focused. Any other insights from how you think about seeding teams where you're tasking them to do what might feel intractable at the time? How do you sort of think about the team dynamics in that regard?
One of the things I've come to learn is the importance of what we would now call a beginner's mind. I'm just going to figure it out. We are going to figure it out. There's no I in team. We are going to figure it out. I have no sense for how hard the problem is. I don't really know what you mean by impossible, but from first principles, we're going to figure it out. And we will do what entrepreneurs do is you typically borrow from lots of other places, right? You have this point of view that nothing is unique. Someone has done this before somewhere else. And you have this perspective of failure is not really an option. We will figure it out from first principles. We will build a group of people, a team, and where we don't have expertise, because often you're generalists in the beginning. It's important to be a group of generalists, to not have some blinders that would otherwise restrict you. But over time, you add specialists and you add other types of lateral thinkers. But I think that those principles of a beginner's mind, kind of a team-oriented approach that starts with generalists, those have been key ingredients. And I know it's cliche, but this statement of failure is not an option, it's a pretty important ingredient when you're setting out to build something. You just have to do it and you will figure it out. And believe me, you are not unique. Someone has done a version of this before somewhere else. You just need to find it and adapt it. And you find some resourceful people, and usually they can figure that out.
I love that sentiment. Let me move us then to talk a little bit about your time at Kobo. So for those who might not be familiar with Kobo, the ebook reader largely recognized as the only global competitor with Amazon in the market. I guess the question back to your failure is not an option, maybe leaning into the hard, tricky stuff. What was it like going up against Amazon in one of their most established spaces?
Yeah, so they were about 9 months ahead of us, and probably with their much deeper pockets. We know they had been working on this for well before that. So this idea of building a global e-reading platform, so ebooks, readers, apps, every country, every language, any book ever written and will be written on any device in an instant. I mean, it was another example of assembling some point solutions and moving to platforms. And that platform enabled an experience which ultimately was magical. I remember, to my grandmother or my parents at the time, it was like magic that a book could just show up. It's like, where did it come from? It just came from the air. People loved that magical moment. And we wanted to bring that to everybody on the planet. And we wanted to start with those that were the most passionate book lovers first. And Amazon was, already in market. They were cooking up the Kindle. It was a special device. It was $500. And the average book reader that reads a book a month does not have $500, did not at the time, to spend on this new device with a keyboard. And so bookstores and publishers who were in the eye of the hurricane without any significant amount of resources or tech prowess to compete, they needed a way. And we came up with that way with this platform that made it easier, they made it affordable, and ultimately could be end to end. And while we went to all these bookstores around the world, like the big chains, the Barnes and Nobles, the Borders, the W.H. Smiths in the UK. Ultimately, the promise of cool new technology was actually not motivation enough to move and to get off the starting line. But the fear that Amazon was coming was a awesome motivator. Growth, revenue, more profit. Nothing motivated an executive team or a board of one of these organizations, the incumbents, quite like the fear that Amazon was coming to eat their lunch so that they get started. And that really drove action. And we provided them a way to leverage their assets, their brand, their buying power, the trust they had, the loyalty that they had, their know-how, along with our tech platform, to get out in the market quickly and to not only hold on to their customers, but to enrich their customer experience, to grow their base. And those that got moving quickly became winners in many new ways. They learned the data gave them all kinds of new opportunity. The ones that took too long, they became the Borders bookstores in the history books. They didn't make it. And so the learning was David can absolutely beat Goliath or many Goliaths, but you can't do it alone. In these shifts, there's power in platforms and power in ecosystems that come together to solve the new problem and make that shift.
With fear as a motivator at times, which is maybe a good segue to this notion of coming back to healthcare. I think I see that happening. Part of what the Academy does is we convene people and in discussion, and you can start, you've been seeing for quite some time now, just the wheels turning around how some of these larger entities, whether it's an Amazon in healthcare or many others that come to mind, I think there's a definite sense for the threat that imposes. It sounds like you would think that could be, that is a healthy way to sort of drive strategy forward. Do I have that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for most healthcare CEOs, there's a lot of reasons to be afraid right now. I mean, consumer sat, NPS, any other measures, they're just very low. And if you looked at other categories and other industries, yeah, that should drive sufficient fear in and of itself. Secondly, big tech has shown up, and part of it is they have to, right? To keep growing at the rate that they have promised investors. Healthcare is one of the only industries that looks big enough. And from a tech perspective or disruption perspective, it looks ripe enough. But not all tech companies are equal here, right? Some are going to play enabler, some will play direct competitor, some will play indirect competitor, right? The wolf in sheep's clothing that eventually is a threat, and some will absolutely become that direct competitor. So it's complex, and pace is also something that I would be thinking about as one of the healthcare CEOs. The beginning of an exponential curve is pretty flat for a long time, right? It doesn't. It's the that old adage of in the desert, you can see your dog running away from home for days, and then all of a sudden there's disruption. And we've all become experts in these exponential curves, watching COVID waves, and one day it's flat and one day it's not. And I think that's where we are in healthcare. New entrants are also part of that. Capital going to those new entrants. I mean, massive amounts of capital compared to the, relatively speaking, small budgets in healthcare organizations, especially around IT. Meanwhile, you've got broad surface area. So it seems like you have a lot of reasons to be afraid. Yet, what I've learned being an entrepreneur is that's just fuel. You got to just go back to first principles, leverage the assets you have, be open minded. All healthcare organizations have something that Amazon or Google or any one of these new entrants don't have yet, and that's trust. You can't out Amazon Amazon. Don't think if you have a plan that requires you to build more than they are going to build with their balance sheet and their tech prowess, you're gonna fail. You have to leverage your strengths, partner where you are weak or where you just don't have strengths, and think about this as a longer duration change. It's not going to happen in a year, but you absolutely have to get moving now to make an impact as things go exponential on you.
I agree. I think providers do have trust from patients. Certainly the ones that we work with at the Academy often have brand recognition in their market. They often have, certainly not to the point that an Amazon would, but they certainly have strong balance sheets. And I have been heartened by seeing the really embedding or this embedding in the DNA. How do we really disrupt ourselves and really move this conversation forward? And I would say they're very mission driven, and the heart of what they do is animated by the patient. And I think not losing sight of that, the addressable market in healthcare, the TAM in healthcare are people and patients, and they're tapped into that, which I do think is a big part of what will move this conversation forward. So let me ask you maybe two wrap-up questions. The first is that you've been in the industry for some time now. You're from Canada originally. What has been the biggest surprise for you on U.S. healthcare?
So growing up in Canada or California, two totally different places, two totally different systems, many of the same problems in healthcare when it comes to the consumer and what they want in the future. There's equal doses of frustration and desire for change. I've had three big learnings. One, and this is a big learning for me about healthcare overall, is the surface area. The surface area of US healthcare is practically infinite. No one organization can solve it all or cover the breadth of that surface area. And it actually screams for this need for a platform model. So that's one. Surface area is infinite. You cannot do this by stitching together point solutions. It's a never-ending effort, and you will not win at that effort. Two, one of my biggest learnings, frankly, over the last 25 years in tech is the simplest things are often the hardest to execute, and that is even more true in healthcare. I remember having this conversation with Elon Musk and Peter Diamandis of the X Prize about, hey, what if we could actually make rockets reusable? And they would just come back to Earth after putting a satellite up there. wouldn't the cost of sending stuff into space just go down? It would save a lot of money and it would be less wasteful and more environmentally friendly. Anyway, simple idea. It's taken 2 decades. Simple idea in healthcare. It's about the consumer stupid, but it's incredibly hard to make that work. So that's the second big one. The third is, wow, the amount of waste. And I feel like, having worked in disrupting telecom or other elements of technology or publishing or books, I feel like I've seen enough large industry, large lack of productivity and efficiency. I've seen a lot of waste, but wow, I think healthcare kind of takes the cake here. Investments in services, systems, processes, maintaining old ways that just don't really lead to value. They don't lead to that value for the end consumer, the end patient. And I think this is just a mindset problem, right? Doctors have been at the center with patients and care nearby. I think the consumer, whether or not they're a patient today or yet, the consumer needs to be at the center. And if you start with that and their journey over time is one that you need to be a part of, I think that's the key to getting out of this mindset, this very wasteful, unproductive mindset.
Yeah, I think that last point in particular, the challenge with putting consumers at the center in a highly regulated industry is that your regulators often drive a lot of that, right? Drive a lot of that disconnect. And I think trying to get through that noise and getting to that root, I think is really important. But your comments are all incredibly incisive. So I have to ask before my final question, just given your a long history with being fascinated by space, would you be one of the people that would raise their hand early for some of these? Did you call Elon and ask for a ticket on his next space venture? What's your thinking on that?
No chance.
No chance.
No chance. I mean, back to my point about complex things, they may sound simple, but they just take a long time. We're a long ways away from, I think, safe space travel, or if you can call it that, low Earth orbit travel. So yeah, not for me, not right now.
Got it.
Yeah, it's a pass.
I'm sure your wife and children appreciate that sentiment.
They do.
All right. My final question, one that I ask all of my guests. So the inspiration for this podcast, the Academy Table, was it's where, for me personally, for all of us, really, we get so much joy from being in conversation with people that we find interesting, with good food in front of us. And so I wonder if you could curate your ideal conversation, any two people, who would you pick to join you at that table and why?
So I asked this question at dinner last night to a group of people,
okay.
and I got some spectacular answers that are nothing like the answer I'm about to give you, right? Everybody went for politicians and world leaders and a lot of famous people. So I'm going to give you an unconventional answer. And the first is really the ingredient that I hope I get from the two people I would invite for dinner. And the first is Maya Angelou. And I had dinner with her. And honestly, it stands out in my life in that the way her words and her warmth just made me feel. And I would want that again. And I think everyone should have that in their life. It was so enriching in ways that my limited, non-poetic set of words cannot describe. So I would hope that I get that again from other people. Now, I don't know if that's going to come from Tom Brady and Dave Grohl, but that's what I'm going to give you. So Tom, I mean, he's an inspiration, the discipline, the consistency, the devotion to excellence and winning, and love him or hate him, dinner with the GOAT would be awesome. He's a student of the game. And so I appreciate that. And the second is Dave Grohl, music fan. I'm sure people are like, who is Dave Grohl? I hope people know he was the drummer, Nirvana, and lead or frontman for the Foo Fighters, and another student of the game, a musician, an incredibly creative and talented musician that I've just gotten to love and follow. And to the point where when I started League, it was called the Everlong Project, named after, a very famous song of Foo Fighters called Everlong. And it had these lines, these two verses: if everything could ever feel this way forever, if everything could ever be this good again. And for me, that captured the sentiment of what it feels like to build something that just changes the lives and impacts so many people. You just want to do it again. And 7 years in with League, it feels pretty good. And there's a lot more to do, but it feels pretty special.
Well, I think that would be a fantastic table. I grew up in Rhode Island as a really obnoxious Patriots fan. From when I was a child, before they were actually good, before the Tom Brady era, and I still root for him. I think there is something to people who are just committed at that level that's really just impressive. And Maya Angelou, when people show you who they are, believe them. That is one of the sort of mantras that I personally follow, which I heard directly from her. So that must have been a pretty special moment. I thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you for joining us, and delighted to connect with you. I hope that you will come back again.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Thanks again for joining me at The Table. The Table is a podcast produced by the Health Management Academy. Make sure you catch future episodes by visiting our website, theacademytable.com, or by subscribing on the podcast platform of your choice. And if you have suggestions for topics or guests, I'd love to hear from you. Please drop me a note at Renee@hmacademy.com. I look forward to talking with you soon.